Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Attack12. Having to call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the Panther M10. It's been a very long time since I reviewed a Tier 7 vehicle, and I just needed a little bit of a break of Tier 8 and higher, because it's been very chaotic the last couple of weeks. The Panther M10 is a very interesting vehicle, not just because of its history, but because I also deem this to be one of the best premium vehicles for the premium tank model. I'm going to extend that. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But let's first dive into the history of this tank, because this is a very, very interesting vehicle, historically speaking. Then we're going to take a look at the characteristics and have some, a look at gameplay, and then I'm going to have a verdict on if you should buy this tank or if it's worth your time and money, and hopefully I can give you guys a little bit of an idea what the Panther M10 is all about. So this tank also has a nickname, not just in the World of Tanks community, but also in history itself, and it's a lot of times considered to be named the war crime vehicle. Why is it called the war crime vehicle? Because it has American insignia on the side and it looks like a M10 Wolverine. To understand this, we have to go back a little bit in history and, to the Ardenne Forest of 1944, the very, very end of the year in December, when the Germans started the counteroffensive in the Ardennes, or they named it the Ardennes Offensive. I'm not sure what the campaign name was again, or the operation name, but they started to counterattack American or Allied, Western Allied positions in Belgium, in France, and I think in Holland or in the Netherlands. And this counteroffensive was started by obviously the different military corps and the different army corps. And at the same time, they used American uniforms and they disguised their vehicles in American insignias, and they disguised their vehicles to look like American vehicles. So this is how this Panther M10 came to life. The Panther was supposed to look like an M10, and there is the question, is that act by itself a war crime? And that is actually not the case. Disguising yourself as the enemy is not a war crime per se, at least by the standards of the Geneva Convention. But disguising yourself as the enemy with the intention to attack the enemy with his own insignia, that is considered a war crime. And that's exactly what happened in 1944 in December, when the Germans started the counteroffensive. They used American insignias, they used American uniforms, they used not just American uniforms, but any kind of piece of uniform that they could get their hands on, and they started an offensive to cause chaos and destruction and confusion among the American lines or the Western Allied lines, and they were quite successful in certain parts. That itself was a war crime by using those uniforms and those tanks against the Americans. If they would have not used them or just utilized them to move to one position from another and then redressed in German uniforms and taken away the American insignias, that would not have been considered a war crime. But since they did, it is considered a war crime. And I think it's very important to address that fact. These Germans that were captured in American uniforms, when they fought against Americans, a lot of times were executed because they were no longer protected by the Geneva Conventions because they broke it. So that's a little bit of history on the Panther M10. A very interesting piece of history, in my opinion. Let's leave it at that. So the Panther M10 is a very, very cool looking tank if we do not look at the history and the way that the Germans used it. But it's a very nice looking tank. It looks a little bit like an M10. And I think it's a very novel tank in World of Tanks because that's when premium tanks were special in one kind of way, but not being overpowered in their use case. So this was not more powerful than the standard Panther that you had at tier 7. And I'm going to prove that point by comparing those vehicles in just a second. So this Panther is using the K42 cannon L70, and the Panther has several other options available. So we're going to compare this vehicle with the Panther. Both are tier 7s and basically both are Panthers, but one of them is just an older version of a Panther, and the other one is a Panther that they actually upgraded. And I don't think that there was a Panther with a long 75mm gun. That's probably just a concoction that Wargaming created. But either way, let's take a look at both of these vehicles and see where the differences are. So the Panther M10 and the Panther both share the same average damage, but the penetration is very different. With the Panther's long 75mm gun, you have almost 50mm more penetration, but you do lack the DPM, and all of these stats are actually almost identical because I have the crew on the Panther M10. The thing is, I don't own the Panther in my garage anymore with crew, so these characteristics are not identical. But if I would put the same kind of equipment on these vehicles, it would probably be almost identical. The only difference is that the gun traverse is by a bit better, definitely by quite a margin better on the Panther M10. But other than that, both vehicles are very similar except for the DPM, which comes down to the equipment I use. The biggest issue or the biggest difference is definitely the penetration that you have, and also with APCR ammunition that you have as secondary ammo or as premium shells, you're able to have even more pen with the Panther. Moving on to survivability, both of these vehicles are very similar, at least if you look at the hull armor, 85, 50, and 40, and you can actually work with that at tier 7 quite nicely. It's very nicely angled. They are very large medium tanks, so you cannot be hidden very well, and your side is very long. But still, the turret is 100mm thick and 20mm less thick at the front and 15mm less thick at the side and the rear. That's because I think they're probably using a different kind of turret on the Panther M10, and it's a turret that has been adapted to look like an American M10. Other than that, I think the stats are very similar, and the biggest difference is probably in the detail, in certain details. Mobility-wise, they're almost the same. I am using the turbocharger on the Panther M10, so I do get an increase of 5 kilometers per hour, and I also have 70 horsepower more. But other than that, they're almost identical, except for the fact of the traverse speed that the Panther M10 has 10 degrees more. So that's quite a large improvement right there. The only big changes are really the traverse speed on the turret and on the tracks, but other than that, both vehicles are fairly similar. If I would be using the crew on the Panther, I probably have very similar stats because my crew is very nicely trained, and I'm also using some vents, I think, on the Panther M10. Concealment isn't that important since I am using the crew on that one, but this vehicle can be concealed okay, but it's still a large medium tank. View range on either one of them is not particularly good on my Panther M10. I am using the skills, but if we check, I think the view range is maybe 380 meters. It's actually 365 meters view range. That's a lot worse on the Panther M10 than on the Panther, which was 380 meters view range with the top upgraded turret. So if you want to have some more view range, train your skills, train your crew, and also maybe get some equipment to help with that itself. But let's talk a real short amount of time about the fact that I think this is a very nicely balanced. It's a very special tank because it's basically a skin. It's a reskinned Panther that is a very special kind of vehicle with a history of deception and war crime. Definitely has war crime written all over it because it was used in that way. And I think that's a very interesting piece of hardware. It makes you think, obviously, about the rules of engagement, rules of war, and I think it's a very nice tank in the game. It's a lot of fun to play if you can, look past the history and everything. But we're playing a war simulator basically. But either way, let's jump into the game, see what it's all about. If I still recommend this tank after having seen that the stats aren't really that much better than the standard Panther, and if you should just stick with the Panther or not, and see what we can do with the Panther M10. So for the gameplay, we're going to be taking a look at a game that we had on Paris, and we were going up against only 3 tier 8 vehicles and quite a few tier 7 and tier 6 tanks. I think this is a pretty damn good matchup to have in a tier 7 in a tier 7 game, because you can still mostly do something against those tier 8s, and they are not tier 9 tanks. There are occasions where you can go into tier 9 matches, and that's not going to be a lot of fun. But either way, let's just take a look at the Panther M10 in this very, very nice color scheme that we have right there. And you will probably notice that this color scheme is a very American looking one. And that is because this is actually the American camouflage that you can get on this German tank. I think that's a very nice detail from Wargaming to give us the American version of the camouflage right there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it should be the American version, I think. But either way, the M10 or the Panther M10. The very nice thing that you'll see immediately is the rate of fire on this thing. I think this is almost the same gun. I'm not sure if it's the identical gun of the E25, but it is very similar. It has the same average damage, it has the same penetration, and probably the same shell velocity. The biggest downside to this gun is that you only have 150 millimeters of penetration. Going up against tier 8s is going to be tough, especially from the front. You're not going to be able to do a lot. That's where you really have to go back and fire those premium shells. As you can see right there, aim time isn't too bad either. Unfortunately, we bounce the chaffee. That's something that will happen to you when you're playing the Panther M10, because this vehicle is just, it's just not able to penetrate a lot of things because the pen is too low. But obviously you need to have some downsides to this absolutely crazy DPM that you have in this vehicle, the crazy reload time of 3 seconds, and the decent gun handling in my opinion. So what you can see right here is we're playing aggressive, because a Panther M10 at tier 7, this vehicle has 1,300 hit points. That's a lot of hit points that you can use, but at the same time it's also a lot of hit points that you can lose in a very short amount of time, because the Panther is actually, to be fair, it isn't armored too badly, but the Panther can be penetrated if you know the basics of this game. If you know the basics, I think you're not going to have an issue as a tier 6, as a tier 7 vehicle to go toe-to-toe with a Panther. But still, at the same time, the angling on this vehicle is fairly nice. There are going to be occasions where you will be bouncing shots, and it is a rather large vehicle. It's a Panther, so you have a very big side profile. Your tank is also rather large. It's almost on the size of a heavy tank. But I still think that the Panther M10 is a great deal of fun as a medium tank, because its mobility is actually very, very good. You can get this thing from point A to B in a very, very quick time. So right now we're just trying to hold this corner, and we're waiting for backup because the enemy they're just sitting in the back right there, and we're just waiting for our team to spot certain tanks that we can fire at them. And look at that rate of fire, it's so nice. We finally are, oh no, we didn't finish off the Super Hellcat, but with that final shot we managed to take him right out, and we do another round of damage, and we also get some assistance damage with the Rudy that we just lit up. So right here we notice that there are some vehicles in the middle, and this is just where you want to be in your Panther M10. I mean, look at this rate of fire. This vehicle is driving away from us. There are going to be some really weird bounces happening because your pen is really bad. But if you can get a flank on with this vehicle, even against tier 7 tanks, tier 8 tanks sometimes, you can really get a lot of damage out of it because the rate of fire is that great. So right here we have a Udes, definitely a very dangerous tank for us. And if we would go toe-to-toe with him, it will probably be a very, very awkward scenario for us because we would be able to deal quite a bit of damage because the Udes is not armored very well. But right there you can see just how quickly we finished him off because he only had a little bit of HP remaining. We got very lucky with the T-28, but look at that rate of fire. That rate of fire, that T-28 is just not turning in. He doesn't want to face us. I'm not sure why he isn't doing it, because he's just allowing us to farm him right there. Unfortunately for us, we do get assaulted by 2 vehicles because our team hasn't really managed to push that corner. We get some assistance by the Cromwell over there, and we managed to take out the Jackson. It wasn't us that took out the Jackson, but we still did a little bit of damage, and we got some assistance damage in the meantime. So there are only 3 vehicles remaining. There's this Leo, and you know, the thing is, with those high DPM kind of, or not, well, the high DPM tanks, what you can do is you can just keep these vehicles tracked. If you have a very high rate of fire, you can just do that. Doesn't matter if you don't have the accuracy to really hit every single shot, but eventually you're going to be able to do damage and you're going to be able to hit him. Eventually, you just have to keep up tracking him, and this Leo must have had a horrible time in his tank right there because we are just eating him up right there. But as you can see, we've basically gone through all of our standard ammunition. Now we've switched over to premium shells, and we were too greedy. I wanted to get that shot on the T-28 prototype, and the very important thing right there is that the T-28 prototype, you cannot really penetrate when you're using the Panther M10 from the front, because his cheeks are going to be really, really strong. They're going to be probably bouncing the rounds up to 230 millimeters of pen, I think. So there would have been no way for us to penetrate the T-28 on the cheeks. Maybe the cupola on top, maybe the machine gun port and the lower plate, but hitting that weak spot right next to the turret wouldn't have worked with the Panther M10. So this was a very fast, action-packed game, and I have to be honest, I really like the Panther M10. This is basically a Panther with the stock 76mm gun. No, not the 76, sorry, that's American, but 75mm gun. And to be fair, it behaves like the Panther. The only thing that this thing does better than the standard Panther is, I think, the turret traverse and the track traverse. Other than that, I think the standard Panther is faster. The standard Panther has better pen, it has a better gun. The standard Panther has, I think, the same amount of armor, or maybe even a bit more armor on the turret. So basically, you get a worse off Panther that is still a lot of fun, and that has this very cool looking skin because it's basically a war crime tank. It's a war crime tank because if you are intending to use this tank to fight against the Allies, it's basically a war crime. But if you're using this tank to run away to a different location, to maybe maneuver behind enemy lines, it's actually not a war crime. It's very interesting because this tank certainly, well, I think they built 4 of them, and they did traverse behind enemy lines, and they utilized them with the intention to cause damage and to obviously cause chaos and do as much damage as they could behind enemy lines. So that makes this a war crime in itself. But either way, I think this tank is a lot of fun. If you like the Panther, if you like fast medium tanks that are maybe a bit bigger, if you like German medium tanks like the bigger ones, and you like the fire rate that you have on the E25, this thing is great because you have great fire rate, you have decent mobility, you have some armor right there, and yeah, the only downside that you have is basically you don't have the pen, you are a bit tall, you're a bit of a big target, especially at tier 7. There are a lot of medium tanks at tier 7 that are so much smaller than you, even at tier 8. But if that doesn't bother you too much, I think the Panther M10 is a great choice, and it's a very unique kind of tank. This is what premium tanks should always have been like. Not better than the standard version, but you know, good enough and a lot of fun when you're playing them, and they should be unique in, I don't know, the looks and the feeling of the vehicle, because there is no tank other than this M10 that was, well, at least in the game, there's no other vehicle that tried to be something else. There are tanks that have been captured by Germans, by the Russians, by the French, or utilized by different nations, but there are no vehicles that are trying to, what was it called? To imitate another tank of another nation, and that makes this very unique. Definitely a collector's item. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video, this review. Oh my god, it's a bit late. I'm sorry, guys. And as always, comment, like, and subscribe. And I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one. Peace out.